This is the Last Minute Blues Podcast with Donnie Fandango, Jeff Burton, Alex Ferrario, and former Blues defenseman Jamie Rivers.
It is the Last Minute Blues Podcast. Donnie Fandango joined in studio by Jeremy Rutherford and Alex Ferrario. Gentlemen, listen, we've got a lot to talk about. We've got a lot of Blues things to talk about. But I just, off the top of this, and I appreciate that I'm going to catch some heat from some people about it, and I don't give a rat's ass. I hate seeing Jake Paul's face anytime, anywhere, talking about anything. Yeah. I don't understand why this guy is popular. I understand that he is now, I guess, a boxer and an MMA guy, and he's really good at it or whatever, but I hate his face. I hate everything about him. I can't root for him, and I pray and cannot wait for the day where somebody cleans his goddamn clock. It will be one of the best days of my friggin' life. I don't even know this guy, but I just see, all I ever see him do is talk ish. And like normally, if you talk a lot of ish, it's because you're good at one particular thing or the other. You're not just some random YouTube doofus that all of a sudden could afford to pay for a trainer to make you this way. Please, dear Jesus, or whatever entity that you believe in, please send someone to Earth to wipe the freaking floor with this guy and somebody shut him the freaking hell up. I freaking hate it.
That's the Donnie I love.
You end the podcast right now. We don't even need Blues talk on this one.
Well, and don't even, and I got to tell you, we could start talking about the Blues, and I'm going to get equally as frustrated and equally as pissed off,
Donnie's
man.
on air after that one.
Hey, can I ask one question?
Yeah, who's Jake Paul? Oh, I know who he is, and I despise the guy about as much as Donnie does.
But seriously, he was a YouTuber.
Yeah.
He literally a YouTuber.
He was a social media influencer.
Right.
As they call them these days.
And his hustle, hey, head off to the hustle. Mm-hmm. I mean, for real. He's made millions and millions. That part.
His brother, too.
But, dude, I just can't.
Yeah.
I just saw a thing where he's getting weighed in for his next fight. And he's on the phone because he's dialed in. Shut up. Somebody kick his ass. I just can't.
That's a terrible dad joke. Isn't he fighting some Russian dude this time around? The one thing I will say, and I'm not heavily into boxing, but I watch boxing. The guys that he has fought in the past have been lower level compared to what some of the boxers are out there. So I'd like to see him get knocked out as well. I like me some Floyd Mayweather, so if he wants to take him on in a fight, that'd be fun.
All right, well, you know what? While I'm still mad about things, I don't understand. In the history of my life in watching this team, I get so goddamn frustrated when I know that they are pushing for a friggin' playoff spot, but they begin some games and end some games and play in between they do not have any sort of sense of urgency even in the slightest.
He must be mad. This is the quickest we've gotten to the Blues.
Yeah, sorry.
Fantastic.
Sorry, but it legitimately, these last two games specifically this week, just leave you with that sort of ick feeling when you're watching them. And then at the same time, to make it worse, when was the last time Nashville lost? It was before they housed us a couple of weeks ago.
29.
They
won 7 in a row.
The Blues have just absolutely taken it, the Predators have just taken it and absolutely run with it. And the first thing that I think about when all of this is going down is Ryan O and leadership there in Nashville and accountability and all of these and all of these things, and it just drives me crazy.
Well, and here's the part that gets me. How many guys other than Ryan O'Reilly and Philip Forsberg on that team can you name on the forward side? How many more players can you name beyond O'Reilly and Philip Forsberg?
I can't myself.
But that's the situation. When you bring in leaders like Donnie's talking about with O'Reilly and Luke Schenn, Barry Trotz is a smart man.
Absolutely.
When he said, hey, I'm not going to coach anymore, I'm going to get in the GM chair, he takes over David Poile, those are the first two guys he identified and said, I want. And that's what I had a Blues player this week, trading texts with him, and we were talking about the Blues, and guess what his 2-word text was? Culture, man, culture.
Ah!
I guess that's 3 words.
Yeah, it's 3 words.
It was culture
away. So Curbs, and I don't know if people caught this before the Edmonton Oilers game. Curbs was with me on pregame because Joe was doing the Bally Sports, so he joined me. And I mean, Curbs was cooking in the first 5-6 minutes, and he was absolutely correct. He's like, when you look at where this team is at and how they've gotten into this retool, he talked about culture and leadership, and he talked about, this got bungled back when the Blues maybe decided not to trade Vladimir Tarasenko or they traded him too late. 1 year too late, where Vladdy came off of the season where it was 40 goals and you were thinking, whoa, this guy's something. That was the year you probably could have traded him. And then instead you held on because you felt the market wasn't there. You felt you could make one more run. You held on to him and you didn't get as much as you probably could have coming off of a 40-goal season. Then it leads to having to make the trades where you have Nick Leddy and you choose Nick Leddy over David Perron because defense was a necessity. But those are two guys that you lost in terms of culture, in terms of David Perron, Vladimir Tarasenko, that had the winning mindset, and then you get to the Ryan O'Reilly side of things. So, I mean, he's not wrong. We're talking about a retool, but we're talking about a retool. What did the guys talk about all the time last year? The locker room's not right. The culture's off. We need to get back to what got us here, and you're still searching for that right now.
You know what? I would love for the day when the team is flat and there's somebody other than Braden Shin that steps up to kind of try to spark the team. I, honest to God, feel like 9 times out of 10 when they're playing like garbage, and I know he's the captain, and that's kind of the role in which that he does, but man, I feel like there was this time, this magical time about a month ago where I felt like things were coming together. And we even talked about it on the podcast. I felt like the Blues were fighting for each other. They were digging for each other. There were 2 times, I don't remember which game it was this week, that Jordan Bennington got absolutely plowed.
Zach Hyman and Leon Draisaitl.
And whether or not it's goddamn on purpose or goddamn an accident, if somebody runs your goddamn goalie, you need to goddamn do something about it. I don't even understand what I'm seeing here. And I think more than anything else, it is the reality of the situation is just become more apparent. And then I start to think, well, they got to make a big move. They got to do something big. Okay, neat. How is that going to go down when you've got all of these no movement clauses and things like that? So I'm kind of salty today. And I don't love that, again, we're here, and one of the topics of conversation amongst our listeners is our $8 million player, Jordan Kyrou, getting benched again for lack of hustle. What the hell is going on here? Like, what is going on? We have seen Robert Thomas mature as a player and as a person, and you can see it. And I know that he has not had a perfect season, and there's been a couple times that he's gotten the bench for a period as well. I get it, okay? But to me, it is night and freaking day, and there are some times that Jordan Kyrou doesn't look like he gives an ish at all about what is going on. And I'm not saying that that's the case, but something big has got to happen here. And a couple of months ago, I would have said, no, you cannot trade that guy. You cannot trade that guy. But what are we going to do here? Yeah. We going to get another coach? We're going to get another coach and see if he can magically make our $8 million player go? Yep. Like, when does this end?
Well, I mean, go back to when it went from Ken Hitchcock to Mike Yeo to Craig Berube in a matter of, what was that, JR? 3 years that it went through those 3 coaches, and Berube was hired, and Doug said, I'm not doing this again. So I would imagine by the third one, if Bannister's not the guy, you're doing that. But, I mean, the not fighting for each other was the part that stuck out to me. And JR, you mentioned this at the beginning of the season, that it's like, cool, it's great that Kevin Hayes is here and you've got these guys, but none of this really matters until I see that the players are fighting for each other. And when your goaltender gets bumped, and I know that in the case you can't do it because you don't want to take a penalty. It's 3-3. You put the best third power play on the league on the power play opportunity, but like, grab a hold of somebody, make it known that that's not okay that you're going to do that. I always go back to last season when the Blues played the Tampa Bay Lightning and Robert Bortuzzo went in on a breakaway and he bumped into Andrei Vasilevsky. All 5 Lightning players threw their gear on the ice and in an instant were on top of Robert Bortuzzo. That's the type of camaraderie that you see in winning teams. And when Binnington gets bumped or when a late hit happens or something like that, you see a couple of, it's the same culprits that are involved with it. Braden Shen, Jake Neighbors. I give Torrey Krug credit. Torrey Krug is always involved. Yeah. But that's about it.
Yeah.
I mean, Tyler Tucker, who's played once in his last 29 games, you're not getting on the ice as much to be able to do that. I don't think you have a group of players that are willing to do that, to invest in that. And if you don't have players that are willing to invest in that, then it's going to be hard to feel like everybody's got your back at certain times in games.
Yeah, and I feel you guys. I get your point totally that in those situations you need teammates to step up for each other. But I'll take it a step further in terms of it doesn't have to be something that's physical. And let's step aside from the Binnington getting bumped conversation for just a sec. You need a group of players who want to play for each other and come together and win a game when everybody watching like Donnie on our TVs can see what's at stake for that game, whether it be the Nashville game at Enterprise or whatever. Name me a player on this team who you feel like, aside from his play like a Jake Neighbors, Toropchenko seems to be going 100 miles an hour all the time, but he's got a limited role, right? A Braden Shen who seems to bring, maybe not offensively. I know people are down on him in the contract and the offense and stuff like that.
I think that's an anomaly for his first season as a captain.
Yeah, but I think that you can say that the effort, at least you can tell he wants the team to win. Name me some other guys on this team where you get that feeling night in and night out. You talk about Jordan Kyrou. We talked about when Craig Berube was fired, and maybe it was a new lease on life for Jordan Kyrou. How 2.5 months later are we talking about, after his benching, he's asked about the benching. Yeah, that's a wake-up call, and we need to be aware that this is playoff time and everybody had a bad game. Why do you need that? You're a 25-year-old player who's making the most money on the team along with Robert Thomas, and this is when your team needs you.
In February,
and it's kind of news to you and others. So to me, we can talk about sticking up for your teammates. He just bumped my goalie. I'm going to go pop him. What the Nashville Predators are doing right now is coming together as a team and realizing that, hey, if we can win a stretch of games here, we can get ourselves in the playoffs, and that's what they're doing.
What JR just said, though, is the part that really popped out to me, too, with Kyrou, was his press conference, and I'll give him credit. He stood up to the media the day after he was benched, and Thomas didn't do that the day after. It took him an extra day, which is fine. 24 years old, it takes time to figure out. But Kyrou used "we" a lot in that press conference where he was talking. We need to be better. We need to do this. Whereas if you go back and listen to Pavel Buchnevich after he was benched versus Tampa Bay,
I need to be better.
I was terrible. I need to be better. What did Robert Thomas say when he talked? And I give him credit for talking, but when he talked, he said, I have to be better than this. I'm a leader. I have to go out there and lead by example, and I wasn't any good. I have to be the one that starts it off. And then you hear Kyrou's where it was, we need to be better, and we need to do this. We have a wake-up call. That kind of tells you where it's at right there. And again, I give him credit for standing up in front of the media. He's 25 years old, but there's a difference from when guys get benched or have the accountability factor lay on them and they say, I need to be better. I was terrible and I need to be better. And then when I heard the "we," it's like, man, that's not the mindset you need right now, especially in February where everybody in the NHL post All-Star break, that is playoff time.
Absolutely so. And I mean, even in talking about Pavel Buchnevich, and I love him a lot, but when you talk about signing him to a long-term deal here, or I feel like he's a guy that is prone to take a night off for, here and there as well. And sometimes even for stretches of time. So I'm starting to wonder, man, like, you need to retool this thing any way you can. And so I'm starting to wonder if that Booch trade really might sort of need to happen. Mm-hmm. I mean, the only problem with that is the offense 5-on-5 is not great. So I feel like, but I mean, I don't know, guys. Where do they go from here? And also, too, one thing, somebody that I've been, excuse me,
Donnie's getting really worked up.
Very bullish on, and tried to give him the benefit of the doubt over and over and over and over and over again. And I think he still deserves that to a certain extent. But to me, this has gone from coach, and there's definitely a player issue here, but Doug Armstrong's got to fix this. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is his roster management, his roster construction. At some point here, even though he's won us the cup, even though he is the great Doug Armstrong, we got to start seeing we got to start seeing something here, or I feel like his job needs to start being in a bit of danger.
Yeah, Donnie, and that's the thing that I tried to address with the article yesterday at The Athletic, that it's the roster, not the coaching, which I felt was the case when they fired Craig Berube, and it's still the case.
Yeah.
And I made a point in the article to say that, hey, Doug Armstrong knows this. Like, you're not opening his eyes to anything that the roster needs a lot of fixing. But let's take that next step. Let's go to the next questions. Like, how are you going to do it? So we totally understand that this is going to take a year or two or three, right? Okay, everybody's on board, retool, fans get it. You got Dvorsky coming, you got Snuggerud coming, but you want to be competitive, right? Well, guess what? You've still got the roster that we've been saying for 2 or 3 years that has a Shen, Falk, Krug, all these guys with the long-term deals. You took a flyer on guys like Kapanen, Vrana, even Blais, and it didn't work. Hayes has, a couple years left on his contract. So now what do? Here's the thing. In order to get better, you've either got to make a couple big deals or you've got to get into the free agent market, which is going to be super expensive. And are you really going out to pay, 6 times 8 for a guy to bring him in and be competitive? You're going to get into a bidding war with teams to bring guys in while you're in a retool? No, you're probably not going to do that. So that's what leads to these questions, and that's why a couple months ago we were asking, could they trade Pavel Buchnevich? Is because they're going to have to do something. And look, I don't think Doug's going to go out trade deadline or this offseason and just make these huge splashes and the team's going to be competitive next year. It's going to take some time, but as I look at this roster and I see who's coming back, and I see what the Blues would have to do to put themselves back in a better position, where do you start?
Yeah. And let's be very blunt.
That's a great. Where do you start?
Let's be very blunt here. Jimmy Snuggerud is not making this team a playoff contender next season. Nope. I mean, look how it took Jake Neighbors a year of playing 40 games with the Blues and then having to be sent down to the minors and coming back up and playing with this Blues before we even saw this. I mean, last year we were talking, at least on my midday show, we were talking like, is the ceiling maybe a third-line winger for Jake Neighbors? And that was off of one season. And in a matter of another season, we were talking him being a top-line winger. But Snuggerud's not fixing this right away.
Right.
Zach Bolduc, I think Bolduc's looked awesome in a few games that he's played. But Bolduc's not fixing this right away. Dvorsky might not even be here next year. So, and to JR's point, you have to do some type of massive reconstruction with this roster if you're in the retool. If not, if you want to admit that this might be a little bit longer than you expected, then by all means. But to say you're in a retool, which Doug nailed what he said he thought the team could do this season. He said, we thought we could compete for a playoff spot, be in the middle tier, which you are. You're still competing. Whether we like the team right now or not, you're competing. Here's the problem, though. A team that claimed they were rebuilding in the offseason, Nashville, Barry Trotz, the first things out of his mouth was, this is going to be a rebuild. They are outplaying you and possibly could be in the playoffs. Minnesota, who might be on the back end of their retool now that some of the contracts are coming off, they're opening up the window. Winnipeg just re-engaged themselves in this window. You're not putting yourself above the middle tier. You're kind of in the middle of it, and now you're taking a step back as Nashville grows, as Minnesota grows, as Arizona begins to get better, although they still have their own issues. Like, you're still Seattle, Calgary, depending on what they do with this offseason. You might be on the back end of that middle tier by the end of the season, and if that's the case, you have to do some type of roster reconstruction, because if you go back with the same thing next year, all these other teams improved while you've looked at it and said, well, we're just going to run it back and hope that we don't have happen to us what just happened to us again.
It is just so frustrating. And I know that we've said this before, and we'll say it again. It is so frustrating to see them start games the way in which they had in the last week or so, where you're just like, guys, like, come on. Like, it's just befuddling to me. So, guys, here we go. $1 million friggin' question. Where the hell do you start? Where? And is it at the deadline this year? And is it by moving a Booch or what have you? I mean, where do you start?
So real quick, I'll kick this one off, JR, just because I was listening to the 32 Thoughts podcast this morning on my way in. It's Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick, who I personally love. Second to JR. I love JR. But Friedman said that, look, the teams that are interested in Pavel Buchnevich that have been calling about him are Edmonton, Vegas, Florida, and Carolina. And he talked about the starting point for the Blues on a Pavel Buchnevich trade. And he said it has to be the equivalent of 2 first-round picks. And when I say that, that doesn't mean 2 first-round draft picks. That means guys that were selected in the first round and a first-round draft pick. Something around that criteria. And Jeff Merrick, who was on with us last week on BK and Ferrario, he said, like, look, the famous saying by Doug Armstrong is you can call and ask about him, but you're not going to like to hear the price. I hope he sticks to that, because some of the projected trades that I saw, like with Vegas of a first-round pick and some guy that was drafted in the first round of 2021, that's not going to get the job done. You're trading a top-line winger, if we believe he is or if we don't believe he is, for somebody who you hope is in 3 years. That's a rebuild. That's not a retool. You got to trade him for somebody who has gotten a taste of the NHL, that was drafted in the first round, that can come in and play top 6 minutes for you. That's where you have to start, I believe.
No, you have to start, because even if he sticks to his guns, great, good for Doug. But if he doesn't, if he comes down a little bit, at least you're closer to that 2 first-rounders, you know, whether it's a first and, like Alex said, a former first-round pick. But the other reason is those picks are going to be late. Like you're talking about the Vegases and Edmontons who could go to the Stanley Cup. Yeah, so that's a late pick. So you're talking about a year and a half of Pavel Buchnevich, and I know these teams are going to have, you know, some financial hurdles to get guys like Buchnevich with a 5.8 AAV into the cap, you know, even this late in the season. But the thing is, like, this is a good player. This is a top 6 player who can step into your lineup and help you win a cup. And this is a major diversion for Doug Armstrong than even I think that he would have thought about doing a year and a half ago. I don't think a year and a half ago you're thinking about trading Pavel Buchnevich. Like, you're not thinking about that. You're going along, okay, this is the retool. How can we get better? Oh, shoot, we might have to. Yeah. And I know he's always thinking ahead. Don't get me wrong. He's always planning years out. But I'm just saying that you get to a point where this might make the most sense, but you're not doing it unless this is a big haul.
And here's the other part that I've wondered about, and Doug does not do this, especially with somebody who's got term on. Do you consider retaining some of the salary on Pavel Buchnevich? Now, understand, if you retain salary this year, you retain it next year as well.
Sure.
But if you're in this retool and you're not sure where you're going to be at by next season, imagine what the return is if you trade Pavel Buchnevich and eat 50% of that contract. Now, again, you're eating, that would probably be 2.5, something like that, $1 million next season for Buch, so that's dead cap on your salary. But can you get somebody who already is a top 6 winger? Like, here's an example, and I don't know if this happens. There's been no reporting. Could you get Martin Necas from the Carolina Hurricanes for Pavel Buchnevich if you're willing to eat some of that salary? That's the other thing to consider, at least for Buch, because like JR mentioned, you've never been in this situation before where you're willing to trade a core piece that you thought to another team. Can you maximize the return coming the other way if you're going to eat some of that salary on Buch?
Who else?
So the other guy, and I didn't think Marco Scandella could get much on the market, but guys, Ilya Lyubushkin getting traded yesterday to the Toronto Maple Leafs for a 3rd-round draft pick is freaking wild. And like, Lyubushkin is a 6th, maybe 7th defenseman. He's been playing with the Anaheim Ducks this season, and I know he played with Toronto, I think it was last year or 2 years ago. But this is like a depth defenseman, and he just got traded for a 3rd-round pick. And they ate some of the salary, so you eat half of the salary of Marco Scandella. I mean, if they're giving out 3rd-round draft picks for that, you could get a 3rd-round pick for Marco Scandella. And again, 3rd-round picks don't mean anything to the Blues right now, but maybe you can load up on that arsenal going into the draft of trading all of those, because that would be, if I'm not mistaken, your 2nd, 3rd-round draft pick or 3rd-round draft pick for this upcoming draft. So that's the other one that I would consider, at least at the deadline. All of the other names, I'm not sure you're going to get much with.
Yeah, that's a good point. But Toronto did go after the defenseman, you know, instead of calling St. Louis and getting
absolutely
Scandella. So maybe it's a 4th rounder. Who knows? But at this point, yeah, when you're 7 points back, you know, there's no sense in keeping Scandella.
And I'm sure Marco Scandella would want a shot at a playoff run. Which,
absolutely.
Like, that's the other thing that you wonder if it opens up a little bit more for Doug Armstrong, whether it's at the deadline or the offseason. Some of these guys with the no-trade clauses, do they look at it and say, man, I might want a shot at a playoff run? Now, maybe playoff teams aren't calling about those guys now, but maybe in the offseason. But I at least think you at least listen on those 2 players at the deadline. On the Kyrou front, because I know that's the next big question, I would personally hold off until the offseason. Maybe somebody calls about it, but The way I look at this is there's going to be a lot of teams that might have to make massive decisions this offseason. Like, I look at the Toronto Maple Leafs with Mitch Marner. They're going to have to figure out what to do. I look at Vancouver if they don't get Pettersson locked up. I look at the Carolina Hurricanes if they've got to move something. What about the New Jersey Devils if they fall out of this? Like, there could be teams that fall out of the playoffs that look at this and say, we got to make a change. What about Arizona? They thought they were going to be a playoff team or at least push for it this year, and now they've lost like 13 in a row. Do they say we need to shake something up? Kyrie's one of those guys that if you decide to move him, I don't think you just move him at the deadline for moving him's sake. You hold on to that and you see what teams are out there that say, we might need a shake-up as well. Let's see what type of hockey trade we can pull off.
Right, because, any trade, obviously, you're going to maximize value, but you're absolutely certain to do the best that you can to maximize value when it's somebody like Jordan Kyrou and $8 million and you have so much already invested in that player and everything going on with it.
Right.
So, all right. Ooh.
I don't know if we made Donnie feel better or worse.
No. I think it's not anything. Here's what I honestly believe, that throughout the course of this year, I feel as though Jeremy has been very good to keep us tethered. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because there have been times, and I'm talking about myself, not you as much, Alex. You're a reality guy. I get lost in things. But we have seen this all come to pass throughout the course of this year, right in front of our eyes. So it is just incredibly frustrating to be here and to feel as though that this year seems like kind of a waste and doesn't feel like it has been at least beneficial in the rebuild. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you have a bad year or a year that has a lot of ups and downs, you go, well, you know what? We're retooling for this. Mm-hmm. Well, right now, I don't necessarily feel like we're in that spot. I feel like we're kind of in this sort of gray zone of weirdness.
Yeah.
And I don't know where we go from here.
Well, I hear you. I am so bad at analogies, but I'm going to make up another one, and it's going to be another bad one.
He's actually good at this, but he always pulls the I'm bad at this, and then makes you all laugh. I'm telling you, this is brutal. But okay, go ahead, JR.
Okay, let's. Thanks for the compliment.
Hey, I pumped you up there.
Yeah. Here's how I think the situation that the Blues are in. You know how you fell and you just have this huge scrape on your leg and it's scabbing up and it's 3 or 4 inches long and it's red. You look down, it's bloody. I mean, you want your leg to be normal again, and you want it to be good. You want to look down and see like what you're used to always seeing, and it's just gonna be there. It's gonna be there for 3 weeks or whatever, and then it's gonna go away, and everything should get better. Well, I think the Blues are in a situation where we just have to understand that scab's gonna be there for a while, and we're putting the medicine on it, the Neosporin. That's what Doug's trying to do, and it's just gonna take a while. That's the thing. So I've said this before. You look at some of these games this year. Where's the heart? Where's the effort? Where's the okay? Well, guess what? Our Neosporin is Snuggerud, Dvorsky, some cap money coming up. We're gonna make some deals. We're gonna do this, and I've said it before. I hate to repeat myself, but 2 years, 3 years, whatever. You look back, man, that sucked, but they built it. Yeah, and they're back, and now they're in a situation where Snuggerud's played 2 years and he looks pretty good, and Dvorsky just showed up and he looks pretty good, and then now all of a sudden, oh my gosh, they're in the talks for that $10 million forward to bring him in to solidify that top six. You just need to get to that point. So I know that's not the fun thing to hear from a lot of people. It's just but that's what they're entering right now.
I mean,
they've got to make they've got to make good decisions, and that's why we're so ultra focused on, do they trade Buchnevich? Listen, if they trade him this week, that's setting back their competitive level another year or so, at least. Like, if you think you're competing in 2 years, 3 years, that's a big decision, because that first round pick that they get, or that prize prospect from Edmonton or Vegas, it's going to take a while for him to develop. So anyway, that's the thing. My thing is, let's still keep the eye on the future, but let's focus on the decision-making to see how you can get there quicker.
See, he says he's bad at analogies. He's great at analogies.
Dude, he just knocked that out of the park.
It's this guy over here.
That was amazing.
So, I got a scrape on my leg.
Yeah, so that's why you went with it.
So it worked.
So just to play devil's advocate, because going from the fan side of it to where I know the frustration is there when you look down and you're like, this isn't getting any better, is when you hear the stuff of the offseason is like, well, we feel like that these guys have to be better than what they were. Like, that's where the frustration was last year, where it was like, well, our defense can't be as bad as they were last season, so we're going to see what we can do with them. Now, some of that was because you couldn't make the trades, and obviously some did improve with Colton Parayko, but that's where the frustration comes from. But to Donnie's question, I wouldn't say it's a loss, because to me, I think you learned a few things from this team this season. Even if you miss the playoffs and you're like, drafting in the top 10. You learned you have an elite goaltender. You learned you have a guy that if you put competitiveness in front of him, he's going to carry you to a playoff spot and probably win that for you. And you got a really good duo with him and Joel Hofer. You've learned that Colton Parayko is back to 100% health. And when he is a top shutdown defenseman. And you've also learned that Robert Thomas is going to be in the Selke Trophy conversation. Elite. I mean, Ryan Whitney even said it. When Ryan Whitney's saying it on Spit and Chicklets podcast, you know it's true. But, like, he's a shutdown centerman, and he's a guy who could get to 100 points. And you've also learned that Jake Neighbors is more than just a late first-round draft pick. Like, you've learned you've got a gem in this guy, and I think when he's consistently playing in a spot and you start to get more and more of culture onto him, where he gets that experience, you're talking about a guy who could push for 30 goals. So those are the things that I look at, and I'm like, okay, well, you've at least got those pieces, and then we'll find out what Bolduc and Snuggerud, Dvorsky, and some of these other guys are.
And not only did you learn everything that you just mentioned, on the positive side, you've also learned who can't cut it.
Yep.
And who shouldn't be counted on, and who can't make it. So I understand what you're saying. It's like a lost year, it seems like, but I think you're just waiting for that scab to heal, and in the meantime, you're finding out a lot about this team.
Well, that makes sense, though. Yeah. That really does.
And the way that the way I always look at it is if it's a lost year, which is tough to say, but is if you miss the playoffs by like 5 points and you're drafting in that 17th, 18th overall spot. Like, that doesn't do you any justice in this position. If you're going to miss it, I believe you got to miss it for a top 10 spot, because that's where you're at least making. I mean, look at how much hype has been around the Blues just because of one draft where you got a Dalibor, Dvorsky, and two other players later in it. That's the type of stuff that, like, if you draft 17th or 18th overall, you're waiting for that guy for 3 years. But maybe top 10, you could see him in a couple of years.
That explains why the passes have been off.
That's exactly why.
Guys, do you worry with guys like Snuggerud and Dvorsky and even Bolduc now who's here and Zach Dean, whomever, do you worry about them getting up here and developing, I'm just going to cut to it, Jordan Kyrou type habits? Are you worried about that player and his various inefficiencies when it comes? Are you worried about that? And these new guys coming in going, I can cut a corner like that guy and still be. Are you concerned about that?
I'm not, because a lot gets made about that over the years, and it can be an issue if it's like a room full of people who
like the Anaheim Ducks
care.
kind of.
But these guys that you're talking about, let's just use Snuggerud for example, like, born into a hockey family.
Just not how he plays.
He knows what's right and wrong, and he's been dying for this chance to get to the NHL, and when he gets here, he's going to hustle. And it doesn't matter if he sees two guys in the corner of the locker room that, talking about video games and getting off the ice quick and stuff like that. Like, he's going to put the time in. So, yeah, you worry about it. And, if there was a locker room full of guys or, influence a Snuggerud in a wrong way. But I think, by and large, these prospects know that, hey, I'm going to put the work in.
Well, and I heard Snuggerud on the Athletic podcast with Joe Smith. They did one just talking with him about how his season's gone. And Joe asked Jimmy about, why did you go back to Minnesota that one more year? You got to be thinking hockey. And he said, I went back because I wanted to prove that I'm a leader, and I felt like I needed more, there were more things I needed to work on. All of those top players left, so I felt like it was an opportunity for me to learn how to lead. And hearing him say that, it's like, okay, guy's got the right mindset. And I go to what Patrick Waugh said when the Islanders were in town. Grant asked him about Bolduc and talking about his defense, and Waugh was very blunt with it. He said, look, you don't just flip a switch with this. He's like, you have to be working on this in junior hockey and in the AHL. And if you get to the NHL and you're working on it, then it implements. But you don't just get to the NHL and flip that switch. So I'm not as worried about it with Snuggerud. I was a little worried with Bolduc, but I think he's shown it in 4 games that he works hard for the pucks. if you've got that work ethic in junior hockey, college hockey, it seems that translates to the NHL, and you hope, at least if I'm putting my Doug Armstrong hat on, you hope that those players' work ethic leaks off to everybody else in that locker room.
All right, so let's fast forward this. Well, I guess we really can't fast forward it because we don't know what happens at the trade deadline.
Like, come on now.
I was just thinking, like if you're Doug Armstrong, is there like one particular area that you're keying on, or one because obviously you've got a couple of things here that need some work. Is there one thing that supersedes it all that you're like, all right, we have to get this particular part right?
I mean, if it's me, and I'm talking in this scenario, we're trading Pavel Buchnevich, I want somebody who either this season or next season is playing in my top 6, winger, forward, or I'm looking for somebody who is a top 4 defenseman. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but Claude Giroux was traded for Owen Tippett, who's playing on the top line with Philadelphia. The San Jose Sharks traded Timo Meier to New Jersey and got a top 4 defenseman who's in their AHL right now, who's tasted a little bit of NHL games. If I'm trading, those guys, by the way, had no term on their contract. If I'm trading Booch with one more year of term, I'm getting somebody who's playing in my top 6 or on my top 4 next season for sure.
Those are real good points, and you should be able to get something like that because, like I said earlier, I mean, you trade Buchnevich, you're setting yourself back a little bit. But if you can look on the horizon and see a Tippett who's had a phenomenal season,
absolutely.
And this organization definitely does need another top 4 defenseman to come in. You got a Matthew Kessel who looked good, right? But
absolutely,
you would expect some sort of shakeup with the D this year, moving one of these veterans out. And who else do you have? Like if Scott Prnovich even does come back based on his UFA status, he hasn't shown to be a top 4 guy yet. So they definitely could infuse themselves. So that's why, that trade could make sense. But, that's what comes back to what can Doug get for the guy.
Hey, dudes, not to interrupt. Why did Kessel go down and not like Tyler Tucker?
Sorry, I'm restraining
Jared
Alex
had to
here.
hold me back on that one. That pissed me off. I mean, I understand why they did. It was roster protection. You're protecting your players. He didn't have to go through waivers. Tucker would have had to go through waivers.
All right,
Everybody else on the team would have had to go through waivers. But not to get on my soapbox here, I don't really care if these guys have to go through waivers. Like Kessel, and I understand Kessel doesn't need to be sitting in the press box. You want him playing. Then don't put him in the press box. Put him on the ice and let him play with the top 6. There are other guys who could sit in the press box. And if you send a Tyler Tucker through waivers, who played 1 game in 29 straight, he could use the ice time. I don't think he's going to get claimed on waivers. If you send a Sammy Blais through waivers, I don't think he's going to get claimed. I don't understand why you're putting a guy who played well. Look, he had 1 bad game in the Detroit Red Wings game, and maybe he was starting to falter off a little bit. But he showed for a good 15-game stretch that he could play top 4 minutes for you against good teams and be at least usable. And that's a guy who has never tasted the NHL. And you're going to send him back to the AHL because, well, we got to get these guys playing time. No, I hate that.
Right. I mean, he was one of your most steady guys there. And also, too, with these young guys, you got to have some bad nights so that you'll friggin' learn, for the love of Pete.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you guys. The only thing, just to bring a little bit to it, is
Don't try and reason with me, JR.
I get an analogy. No, I'm joking. So
now you're starting to turn into BK reasoning with me.
People might say that Tyler Tucker won't get picked up on waivers. He will get. Who knows? And you know what? If you lost him, would it be the end of the world? Probably not. But you could use the depth on defense, especially if you're losing a Scandella. You lost Bortuzzo. You could lose Prnovich. So you don't want to just give away a guy, right? But a couple things is, I'm always a guy who looks 2 weeks into the future. Let's look 2 weeks in the future, and Kessel's back on the roster. We're past the trade deadline. Now, Kessel's playing the remaining game. Who cares if you lost those 2 or 3 games, in late February because you didn't have Matt Kessel in the lineup? And then the other thing, I know Doug and the staff, they always look at it this way too. Hey, if a guy's game slips a little bit, whether it's 1 game or 3 games, let him go catch his breath, go down to Springfield, and say, oh, man, okay, 5 games in Springfield, I feel better about my game, I come back, and you're better for it. So, for sure, could he be helping this team? Could they won a couple games? if they have their best players on the ice, and Kessel has been one of their best players. It's just I think you look in 2 weeks, you look back if he's up here. Now you guys, when you do a pod here in 2 weeks, and you say he's not back.
Where is he at, Jeremy?
Jeremy likes analogies. I'm going to give you an analogy of what you just did right there. That's the equivalent of when I'm on the golf course and I have a terrible swing and my dad walks up behind me and he's like, why don't you try this? And then I redo the swing and it looks great. I'm like, shut up, Dad. Go back to what you were doing. That was the
Alex
analogy
was
for
giving
you.
me the shut up dad look.
But I'm giving you the shut up, Dad, because that was actually spot on. And I, don't. Sometimes I do get away from it, Donnie. I drift off into Donnie land.
All right, so
Donnie said I'm tethering. I'm trying to tether.
You're tethering. Believe me, it's like a tetherball contest right now.
All right, so guys, just a couple things to finish up here. In the last couple of weeks, has there been a team or two in the NHL that you have start to feel like these guys are really looking like Stanley Cup content, or like these could be finalists here?
Mine's Edmonton. I didn't think I'd ever say that, but Edmonton is... If this is Stuart Skinner, Edmonton's going to be representing the Western Conference in the Stanley Cup Final. I think they've got grit. I think if they make a move to bring in a Pavel Buchnevich, that's going to make them even more dangerous. Their defense with Evan Bouchard, I think their top four is a very good top four. It all comes down to Stuart Skinner. And, I can't deny what Skinner's done. Does he look great at times? Yeah, at times he looks like a backup goaltender. But then that stretch of 16 consecutive games, he was one of the best goalies in the league. So I personally think I'll give you my bold prediction now. Winnipeg versus Edmonton is going to be a Western Conference final, and I might give the slight edge to Edmonton. Now, trade deadline could change my mind dramatically because we all know Vegas is going to find a way to make some moves.
Absolutely so. Jeremy, what about you?
See, and that's the thing. I got to go with Dallas, obviously, a front runner. I'm not giving you a dark horse there, but with getting Chris Tanev.
That's a good move.
From Calgary, Jim Nill said what a lot of GMs, Doug Armstrong, has said over the years, that your team tells you what they want you to do, and the Dallas Stars have been telling Jim Nill, not verbally, but with their play, that they're ready to make a run at this thing, and so he goes out and adds Chris Tanev at a pretty good price there, right? That was steal. That was a steal.
I don't know what Calgary was doing, and I love me some Craig Conroy, but that was to get a second-round draft pick, and that was it, and a conditional third-round pick for 2026. And I know they got a prospect, but Scott Wheeler for the Athletics said that was their 10th best prospect. Yeah. That was wild to me.
Well, and it shows that, if nobody's paying the price, that you're just not going to get it. And that ties into our Buchnevich conversation today. I think the Toronto Maple Leafs beat writer for the Athletic tweeted that Toronto could have had
Tanev.
Could have had Tanev if they would have given up the first-round pick.
Yeah.
They wouldn't. Everybody wants to give Bill Armstrong in Arizona trouble for not getting a first-round pick for Chychrun. Well, guess what? If 5 teams are offering a second, you're not getting a first.
And the Chychrun one, I understand it because you had gone 3 straight years where it's like he's not getting moved. But the Tanev one, I just don't know why you jumped so quick. Because
you still got a whole nother week, right?
If you wait till the deadline, and let's say Hanifin gets traded, let's say Lyubushkin gets traded, all of these defensemen get moved, and Tanev's the last one standing, and there's 3 teams that still need a defenseman, that's when teams pony up. That's why I was so surprised, but, maybe that's all they were going to get. Maybe teams said, we're not going to a first-round pick, but does that change when a team sees 2 other teams in their division make moves and say, well, now we have to do this?
Where does Getzel go?
Vegas.
Pittsburgh.
You don't think he's going to get moved?
I
think he goes to Vegas. I think if Vegas had their choice between Buch and Gensel, it would be Gensel. Because then you don't have to worry about him being there next year. You can figure out your cap space. If you want him back, you can sign him. But, Gensel screams Vegas, doesn't he? Just like goal-scoring winger in their top playing with an Eichel and a Mark Stone.
But Crosby's screaming Getzel. So.
right. Don't get keep him here, and you got to keep Sid the Kid happy.
No, Crosby's screaming, can we go find any other 35-year-old guys to play with us this season?
So Gensel in Vegas and Buchnevich in Edmonton?
That's my prediction. That's my prediction.
All right. Also, I love Canadian hockey teams. I love them. All of them. Every single stinking
Even
one
Winnipeg.
of them. Even Winnipeg. Okay. Let me say this. I love that there is hockey there. And it's very alarming to see that report this week and last week about Winnipeg and maybe them having some issues with long-term viability there in Winnipeg. I hope in one way, shape, or form this can be worked out. But as I'm reading this article, I'm thinking to myself, you're in a small market. Going to a hockey game costs $1 zillion friggin' dollars. I think a lot of times, man, it's just not broken down to the brass tacks of this is not a cheap thing. It's not like you can get a $5 ticket like you can to certain Cardinal games. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is a friggin' financial commitment, and if you are in a smaller market, they don't probably have those friggin' dollars to go around like that. So what the hell happens here, guys?
I think you're going to have to move him, which I know Gary Bettman was in Winnipeg, and I loved how Gary Bettman always plays it off. He shows up in Winnipeg in the end of February when it's like minus 40 degrees.
Nothing's wrong.
And Bettman's like, why are you all speculating of why I'm here? I'm just here to watch hockey. I come here all the time.
Right.
Yeah, I don't come in February, but no, yeah. I mean,
I was coming home from L.A. and just stopped in.
Yeah, I was in my mansion out in Hollywood, but I said, let's go to Winnipeg for a game in the middle of February. But, I mean, I understand, like, Gary Bettman's, shutting down all of the rumors and blowing out all the fires and things like that. But, I mean, when your chairman is coming out saying, like, this is not sustainable for the long run, we need to start, I think he said we need to get back to 18,000 or 13,000.
Yeah,
if you're
13, yeah.
If the chairman's saying it's not sustainable and you need to get back there and it's gone back like 4,000 or 5,000 ticket sales in the last couple of years,
something's got
to give. And you've got two different cities that have already made it very clear they want NHL teams in Salt Lake City. And where was the other one that did this?
Well, Atlanta?
Oh, Atlanta.
Yeah,
Atlanta.
that's
So
a
you
big
got
one.
two teams that both have said, we want NHL teams.
And doesn't the guy that owns the Houston Rockets want a hockey team like super friggin' bad in Houston on top of it too?
Yeah, I think they want to get to Houston. I thought Arizona was going to go to Houston.
I
And
did
they may
too.
still.
I think Arizona's going to Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like Salt Lake City is like, leave Phoenix today and come here tomorrow, and we will have you absolutely square and ready to roll. And you know the thing about that, and listen, I hope that eventually at some point they can make it work in the desert, because it seems like
I love Arizona hockey.
Well, and it seems like that is legitimately a hockey hotbed. Like there is a lot of love for it. So it drives me crazy that it doesn't work. But also at the same time, I think it's kind of exciting that you've got maybe like a new a bit of rivalry going up there in the Pacific Northwest with Seattle, with Vancouver, with a Salt Lake City team. I think that's
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool. And also, too, you would have to think, and this is obviously a different sport, but like I would think Major League Baseball has got to be knocking on Nashville and Salt Lake City's door for both of those.
And baseball's going to be expanding. I forgot who said it, but there was a reporter that said, like, yeah, baseball's going to go to 32 teams. It's just a matter of when, not if.
Yeah.
And Nashville's going to be one of those places, and then you've got the others that swoop in with it. But, I mean, Winnipeg was in Atlanta before they went back to Winnipeg, so that seems like it would be a normal destination if it decided to go that route.
Gosh, I just feel so bad for those fans already. And like if you're just a rando hockey fan like me or you in Winnipeg and you're starting to think, is this real? Then I start to think, like the St. Louis Rams nonsense starts bouncing around in my head like, oh, God,
that was brutal.
We're going to friggin' lose them.
No, it just kills me. I read Chris Johnston's piece in The Athletic talking about Winnipeg and the situation up there, and he interviewed the CEO, president, Chipman, and, this guy admitted he's making phone calls to season ticket holders who have canceled. I mean, can you imagine? Hey, Fred, who's that calling? Well, it's Chipman from the Jets. He's wondering why we canceled. Like, that is some pretty grassroots stuff to be able to, try to go back and
imagine being
base.
Chipman and your team is fighting for first place in the Central Division, could be a Stanley Cup contender, and you're trying to convince people to buy season tickets. I mean, if you're convincing people to buy season tickets, then what's going to happen in 3 years when Connor Hellebuck's 37 and the team's on the down spiral? That's the tough part.
Yeah, see, this is when the fan in me just
this
all right,
is
I don't know what
PTSD.
Yeah, like whatever we got to do, let's just keep them there. Like just the idea of, and especially a town like Winnipeg.
Yeah,
I mean they've got CFL football. They've got the Blue Bombers, I think. I can't believe I know that. But that would just be such a friggin' drag to that freaking community, and I hate that more than
when was the last time a team left a city to go to another city? Was it Atlanta going to Winnipeg in the NHL?
Or was it? Yeah.
Because all the others have been expansion teams, Vegas and Seattle. I think the last time was Atlanta going to Winnipeg.
Well, what about Minnesota going to Dallas? I know that was before.
That was before.
Yeah,
that was before. But yeah, I think Atlanta to Winnipeg was the last time that had happened. So it's been. I mean, that was like post Chicago Blackhawks first Stanley Cup. So it's been about like 13 years since that happened.
I haven't been very positive on this particular episode of the Last Minute Blues podcast.
We got to Jake Paul and your love for him.
Yeah,
we talked about the Blues.
Yeah,
we got to Jordan Kyrou.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about Blues prospects. That was good in there.
Yeah. Yeah,
JR,
I knew this was.
you?
I knew this was going to happen though too. Oh, but also too, guys, tell me where I can buy a cover of that hockey news that's got all of our guys on it. Is there a physical link to that?
Free. I think you could get it free on the Hockey News' website, if I'm not mistaken.
Just go online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have to get that because that's absolutely friggin' badass, and I think that broke last.
All
of them on there, and just like the way that it looks, there's just some swagger going on there, and that's the kind of glass half full thing that I need right now.
That's how you end a damn podcast.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Last Minute Blues podcast for Jamie Rivers, our friggin' homeboy Jeff Burton, who we miss so much. It's Alex Ferrario, it's Jeremy Rutherford, Donnie Fandango, thanking you for listening and saying, "Let's go Blues."
The Last Minute Blues Podcast. Hear more at 1057thepoint.com.